By the time they realized the nanny was armed, it was almost too late. The Ashford estate looked like a postcard for power. Glass, stone, warm lights, and money pretending it was taste. From the outside, it felt untouchable. Inside, it was worse. Crystal laughter, soft jazz, high heels on marble, men in tailored suits pretending they weren't afraid of each other, women smiling with the kind of teeth that never missed a dentist appointment. Gideon Ashford floated through it all like he owned gravity. He was 42, impeccably dressed, and built from the same material as headlines, the kind of billionaire people called self-made, like it was a compliment, even when it was really a warning. Tonight mattered. Not because he needed approval. Gideon didn't need anything. But because the wrong people were watching. Upstairs, away from the music, 7-year-old Elliot sat on the floor in a quiet room with a toy astronaut in his lap. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was too quiet for a child. Beside him, his nanny, Sable Hart, knelt with calm hands and a soft voice. If anyone had glanced at her, they would have seen what they expected. A professional caregiver, attentive, composed, invisible. But Sable wasn't watching Elliot. She was watching the house. Her eyes moved in patterns, doorways, shadows, reflections in framed artwork. She listened to footsteps like they were sentences. Then, with emotion so small it could have been mistaken for nervousness, she touched the inside of her wrist. A faint vibration answered her. Sable exhaled once, slow, controlled, and whispered, barely audible, "Not yet." Because danger never arrives loudly at first. It arrives like a mistake you don't notice until you can't undo it. Gideon Ashford didn't just throw parties, he staged them. Every light was placed to flatter faces, every bottle selected to make men feel generous, every guest chosen for what they could give him or what they feared he could take away. Downstairs, Gideon stood near a wall of glass as the city lights glittered beyond his property line. Rourke, head of security, leaned in. "Perimeter is clean," he said. "No anomalies." Gideon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Clean is a word people use right before they're wrong," Gideon replied. He turned, greeting a new arrival, Vance Merrick. Vance wore a polite grin and carried himself like a man who had never been told no. His handshake lingered half a second too long. "Gideon," Vance said, "still collecting powerful people like trophies." Gideon chuckled lightly. "I prefer the term building alliances." Vance's gaze flicked past Gideon's shoulder, toward the stairs. "Your son here tonight?" Vance asked, casual as sugar. Gideon's smile tightened. "He's upstairs, with his nanny." Vance nodded, as if that answered something only he could hear. Upstairs, Sable guided Elliot to the window, then quietly moved him away again. Elliot frowned. "Why do we keep changing spots?" Sable lowered her voice. "Because the safest place in a room changes when other people move." Elliot stared at her like that didn't sound like nanny talk at all. Sable softened her tone. "Look at me," she said gently. "If anything feels strange tonight, you hold my hand. Understand?" Elliot nodded, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp for 7. He looked down the hallway. "Dad doesn't like strange," he whispered. Sable didn't answer that. She listened. A distant clink downstairs, a laugh that didn't match the others, a rhythm of footsteps on the staircase, someone going up, then stopping halfway. Sable rose smoothly. and quietly locked the door. Elliot's voice came small. "Are we in trouble?" Sable looked at him and chose her words carefully. "Not if you do exactly what I say." To anyone watching, Sable seemed too precise. She didn't scroll her phone, didn't wander, didn't look bored. She checked the baby monitor. Except Elliot was 7. She checked the hallway camera feed, except Nanny's didn't have access to that. She moved through the room with the quiet confidence of someone who could break a wrist without raising her voice. And downstairs, Gideon noticed. He watched her when she came down briefly to refill Elliot's water. Sable didn't walk like staff. She walked like she belonged. Gideon intercepted her near the kitchen corridor. "You're new," he said. Sable met his eyes with polite professionalism. "Yes, sir." Gideon's gaze dropped to her wrist. A slim band, not jewelry, not a watch. "What is that?" he asked. Sable glanced down once. "A health tracker." Gideon stared. "For a nanny." Sable's smile didn't change. "I like to monitor my heart rate. Helps me stay calm." Gideon stepped closer, voice lower. "My security team didn't mention you were specialized." Sable tilted her head just slightly. "Specialized?" Gideon's eyes narrowed. "I've hired caregivers before. None of them scan exits when they enter a room." Sable held his gaze. "I scan exits because your son matters." Gideon's jaw tightened. "So does my reputation," he said coldly. "And you're starting to feel like a liability." Sable didn't flinch. "Then you're misunderstanding me." Gideon leaned in, voice sharper. "Who sent you?" Sable paused, just long enough to be dangerous. "Someone who doesn't want you to be surprised tonight," she said. Gideon's face hardened. He didn't like surprises, not in business, not in his own house. He turned abruptly. "Rourke." Rourke appeared. "Run her again," Gideon ordered. "Full background, right now." Rourke hesitated. "We already did, sir." "Do it again." Rourke nodded and walked off. Gideon looked back at Sable. "If I find out you're lying to me," he said softly, "you won't leave this house through the front door." Sable's expression didn't change, but her eyes did, for a fraction of a second. They looked like someone who had already decided how many doors she'd need. Upstairs, Elliot waited near the locked door. When Sable returned, he asked one question. "Why does my dad look scared when he thinks no one sees?" Sable didn't answer. She just took Elliot's hand and said, "Stay close." The party grew louder. More guests arrived, more laughter, more expensive promises floating in the air. And still, Sable felt the house tightening, like a trap that hadn't snapped yet. She checked the camera feed again. Front gate, normal. Side entrance, a shadow moved. Then nothing. Back garden, empty. Then she noticed something else. One of the security feeds wasn't lagging. It was looping. The same 3 seconds playing again and again. Sable's stomach dropped. She didn't show it. She turned away from the screen and found Gideon. He was mid-conversation with Vance Merrick, smiling like a politician. Sable approached without urgency, because urgency is contagious. She leaned close to Gideon's ear, voice quiet. "Your West camera is compromised." Gideon's smile stayed frozen for the guests. His eyes flicked to her. "Not now." Sable's tone didn't change. "Now." Gideon excused himself with a polite laugh and walked her into a hallway, away from eyes. His mask dropped. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Keeping your house from becoming a headline," Sable replied. Gideon's gaze sharpened. You're crossing a line. Sable took a slow breath. You don't even know where the line is. Gideon stepped closer, anger controlled but real. I didn't hire you to manage security. Sable's eyes held steady. Then who did you hire me for? That landed wrong. Gideon's voice went dangerously calm. I've built my life on knowing who's in my world, he said, and you are a blank. Sable nodded once. Blanks are useful. Gideon's jaw clenched. No, he said, blanks are threats. He opened the door and called out, Rourke, escort her out. Sable didn't argue. That was the part that bothered Gideon most. A con artist would plead. A liar would panic. Sable simply looked past him, toward the staircase. Your son is upstairs, she said quietly. He should not be alone tonight. Gideon's eyes flashed. Don't tell me what my son needs. Sable's voice dropped even lower. I'm not. I'm telling you what's coming. Rourke arrived. Ma'am, he said tense, please come with me. Sable walked, not hurried, not slow, just inevitable. As she passed Gideon, she said one last thing, soft enough that only he could hear. If you want to stay alive, stop pretending you're untouchable. Pause. And then she was gone. Upstairs, Elliot sat in silence. He stared at the door, and for the first time that night, he looked afraid. Not of the house, not of the party, of the fact that the only person who seemed prepared had just been fired. At first, nothing happened. That's how danger works. It waits for arrogance to settle. Downstairs, Gideon returned to his guests with a smile that felt too tight. Vance Merrick watched him like a man watching a clock. Rourke approached Gideon, whispering, Sir, the west feed is still looping. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Fix it. We're trying. Try faster. A laugh erupted near the bar. A glass shattered. Everyone laughed again like it was charming. But Gideon's instincts, those expensive instincts, started to itch. He looked around. One of the waiters wasn't wearing the correct uniform. Not a big difference. Just wrong enough. Gideon turned to Rourke. Who's that? Rourke followed his gaze. I don't know. That wasn't an acceptable answer in Gideon's world. Upstairs, Elliot stood by the door, hand on the knob. He didn't open it. Sable's voice echoed in his mind. Not if you do exactly what I say. Elliot walked to the window instead. Outside, the garden lights glowed, and beyond them, a darker shape moved between hedges. Elliot froze. He backed away from the window, heart racing. Downstairs, Gideon lifted his drink as someone proposed a toast. Vance Merrick spoke smoothly. To Gideon Ashford, he said, a man who always wins. Gideon lifted his glass. But his eyes weren't celebrating. They were searching, because the air felt wrong, like a storm that hadn't arrived yet. Then Rourke's earpiece crackled. His face changed. Sir, he whispered, we've got a breach at the service entrance. Gideon's throat went dry. How many? Rourke swallowed. We can't see them. And that was when Gideon realized something terrifying. He didn't have a problem. He had a plan happening around him. The music kept playing. That was the worst part. Soft jazz drifting through a house where reality had just shifted. Rourke motioned discreetly to two guards. They moved toward the corridor. Fast, quiet, controlled. Guests didn't notice. They never notice. Gideon started toward the stairs. He needed Elliot. Now. But Vance Merrick stepped into his path with a smile. Where are you going? Vance asked lightly. Gideon forced calm. Bathroom. Vance's eyes flicked upward. Upstairs bathrooms are nicer, Vance said. Something in that tone made Gideon's blood turn colder. Gideon's gaze sharpened. What do you want, Vance? Vance sighed like Gideon was slow. I want what you owe. Vance said softly. Gideon's voice dropped. I don't owe you anything. Vance leaned closer. You took something from me, he whispered, years ago. You didn't think I'd survive it. Gideon's mind raced. Old deals, old betrayals, old bodies buried under paperwork. He remembered, and the memory tasted like metal. Not tonight, Gideon said. Vance smiled wider. Tonight is perfect. Upstairs, Elliot heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the normal security steps. These were slower, deliberate. A soft click sounded near the lock, like someone testing it. Elliot backed away, staring at the door like it might breathe. Then he heard another sound, a whisper, not from inside the room, from just outside it. Elliot. The voice knew his name. Elliot's eyes widened. He didn't answer. He remembered Sable saying, "Stay close." But Sable wasn't there. Downstairs, Gideon pushed past Vance. Rourke grabbed Gideon's arm. Sir, you need to stay. Gideon yanked free. My son is upstairs. Rourke's eyes were hard. So is the threat. Gideon didn't care. He ran up the stairs, fast, uncontrolled, terrified. He reached Elliot's door, tried the handle, locked. He pounded once. Elliot? No answer. Then Gideon heard it too. A second set of footsteps. Approaching from behind him. He turned and saw a man at the top of the stairs. Not staff, not security, holding something small and dark at his side. Gideon's breath caught, because in that moment, he finally understood why Sable had been watching the exits. The man moved one step closer. Gideon didn't move. His body didn't know how. He was a billionaire, used to controlling outcomes with money, not muscle. The man lifted his hand slightly, not enough to show everything, just enough to promise it. Gideon swallowed. Who are you? He managed. The man smiled faintly. Someone you forgot, he said. Then, fast as a blink, the hallway behind Gideon shifted. A shadow moved, a hand appeared, and the attacker's wrist snapped sideways with a sickening efficiency. The small dark object clattered to the floor. The man gasped, more from shock than pain. Gideon spun. Sable Heart stood behind him. Not a nanny anymore. Her eyes were cold steel. Her voice was low. Move, she said. Gideon froze. Sable grabbed his collar and shoved him against the wall like he weighed nothing. Then she kicked the object away with her foot. Precise. She leaned in close to Gideon's face. Where is your son? She demanded. Gideon pointed, shaking toward the door. Sable didn't hesitate. She pulled a slim tool from her pocket and worked the lock in seconds. The door opened. Elliot stood inside, pale, eyes wide, holding his toy astronaut like it was a weapon. Sable stepped in front of him instantly. Behind me, she ordered. Elliot obeyed without question. Because whatever Sable was, she was the first adult that night who felt like safety. Gideon stared. Who are you? He whispered. Sable glanced at him like he'd asked the wrong question. I'm the reason your son is still breathing, she said. Downstairs, the music still played. Guests still laughed. And Gideon realized with horror, no one knew what was happening in his own house. Sable looked down the staircase. Her jaw tightened. We're not done, she said. Then she pressed her fingers to her wristband and spoke quietly into the air. Package secured. Phase 2 is active. Gideon's blood turned to ice because those weren't nanny words. Those were operational words. Sable moved fast. She guided Elliot into a back corridor that only staff used. Gideon followed, stumbling like a man waking from a dream. Rourke appeared, face pale. "Who the hell is she?" he demanded. Sable flashed a small badge, so quick it barely registered. Rourke's posture changed instantly. He stepped back. Gideon stared. "You're what? Police?" Sable didn't look at him. Not exactly. They reached a storage room. Sable pushed Elliot inside and shut the door. Elliot's voice came through the crack. "Am I safe?" Sable's answer was immediate. For now. Gideon's anger finally broke through the fear. "You used my house," he snarled. "You used my son." Sable snapped her gaze to him. "Don't," she said sharply. Gideon flinched at the authority in her voice. Sable lowered her tone. "I didn't choose your son," she said. "You did. The moment you made enemies and pretended money would stop bullets." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "I don't have enemies." Sable almost laughed. "You have a guest list full of them." Rourke stepped forward. "Who's behind this?" Sable's voice turned colder. "Someone who wants Gideon Ashford to pay for what he did in St. Kieran, 2019. Gideon's face changed, just slightly, but Sable saw it. "Ah," she said quietly. "So you do remember." Gideon's jaw clenched. That was business. Sable leaned closer. That was blood. Rourke's eyes flicked between them. "Tell me what you are," Gideon demanded. Sable's answer was blunt. "Protective operations," she said. "I was hired undercover to keep you alive long enough to extract you." Gideon's voice cracked with disbelief. "Who hired you?" Sable held his gaze. "That's not the question you should be asking." Gideon swallowed, then asked the one question that mattered. "My son? Was he the target?" Sable's face went still, and then she delivered the first reveal like a knife. "No," she said. "You were." Gideon's breath hitched. Sable didn't stop. "And if you died in front of everyone tonight," she said, "they would have made it look like chaos." She tilted her head toward the party downstairs. "Then they'd take Elliot after." Gideon's knees almost buckled. Sable's voice dropped darker. "Because children are leverage." Gideon's voice went quiet. "Why?" he asked. Sable's expression hardened. "Because you ruined the wrong man," she said. She looked toward the staircase. "Vance Merrick is not here to scare you. He's here to erase you." Gideon's eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about." Sable stepped closer. "I know exactly," she said. "I read the files. I watch the footage. I listen to the calls you thought were encrypted." Rourke's face tightened. "Sir, what did you do?" Gideon didn't answer. His silence answered instead. Sable's voice became almost calm. "This is the second part," she said. Gideon frowned. "Second part of what?" Sable glanced toward Elliot's door, and then came the double reveal, the one that makes Ovidio explode here. She said, "I wasn't hired to protect your son." Gideon stared. Sable continued, "I was hired to protect the outcome." Gideon's throat went dry. "What outcome?" Sable held his gaze. "To make sure you lived long enough," she said. "To confess." Gideon froze. Rourke's eyes widened. Sable's tone was flat, professional. "Someone wants you alive," she said, but not free. Gideon's voice went small. Who? Sable finally answered with something colder than a name. The people you thought you could buy, she said. Gideon swallowed, shaking. Downstairs, a cheer erupted. Someone made a joke. People laughed. The world kept turning. Sable leaned close. If you walk back into that party, she whispered, you'll die. Gideon's eyes burned. I can't run. Sable tilted her head. You ran in 2019, she said. You just called it a deal. That hit him like a punch. A long beat. Then Elliot's voice came from inside the room, small and steady. Dad, are we leaving? Gideon closed his eyes. For the first time that night, his mask cracked. Sable looked at him. Not cruel, just final. Choose, she said. Your image or your son? Gideon opened his eyes and nodded. Sable exhaled. Good, she said. Then she touched her wristband again. Moving, she said quietly. Now. She opened the door, pulled Elliot close behind her, and guided them toward a hidden exit. As they disappeared into the darkness, the party continued upstairs like nothing happened. And Gideon Ashford finally learned the most expensive truth of his life. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room is the man who believes he can control it. If you want more emotional and cinematic stories like this, consider subscribing to Midnight Tales. New stories are coming soon. Some stories only happen at midnight.